My mom chose her toxic stepdaughter over me and kicked me out. Now that I'm engaged, my fiancé's company dropped her husband and she blames me. I'm 26 and have been engaged to Jeff, also 26, for about 2 months. We met 4 years ago on a dating app and have been inseparable ever since. Jeff is my soulmate. He's the only person in my life who has never let me down. My life hasn't been easy. My parents divorced when I was 2, and my father walked out, never looking back. He paid child support, but that was the extent of his involvement. He never checked in on me. Honestly, my mom, 48, wasn't a great mother either. When I was young, she prioritized other activities over raising me. I was mostly raised by nannies and babysitters. As I got a bit older, my mom was still quite young, with different priorities. She didn't really care about being a mother, spending most of her time with friends or on dates. She was a social butterfly with no time for me. Even professionally, she wasn't serious. She was a freelance artist making good money, but she didn't have to worry about me since child support covered everything. I hate to say it, but without that child support, I'm pretty sure she would have kicked me out ages ago. She was never very devoted to me, and I suspected she was just waiting for me to grow up, so I'd leave her alone. Then, when I was around 13, she started seeing my stepfather, Matt, 50. Matt has a daughter close to my age, who we'll call Jess. When they first started dating and my mom brought his family home for introductions, she told me to be on my best behavior because it was very important to her. Now, my mom had brought boyfriends home dozens of times before, but she'd never cared how I acted. Usually, she'd just say she had guests, and I'd take that as a cue to retreat to my room until they left. This time, though, I got the impression she was serious about him. Otherwise, she wouldn't have cared about my behavior. In other words, if she wasn't serious about Matt, she wouldn't have worried about me being in the house at all. The first time I met him and his daughter, they were relatively kind, and it was a pleasant introduction. I had no idea what was coming next. Soon after that initial meeting, he started visiting more frequently, and it felt like they'd almost moved in together. I didn't mind. It wasn't bothering me, so I didn't worry as long as they let me live my life. It stayed that way for a long time. They were practically living together, and Jess would visit occasionally. Her mother was still in her life, so she spent half of each month at her mom's house. Initially, people were either polite to me or ignored me, which I was fine with because I didn't really care for any of them. I barely cared about my mother, so it was hard for me to care about anyone connected to her. All I wanted was my own peace and quiet, which I enjoyed for a while. But then they decided to make it permanent and officially move in. I wouldn't have cared, but my mom informed me that since they were moving in, I'd have to start sharing my room with my stepsister. I refused. It was my room, had been my room my entire life, and it was the one thing that gave me peace in that house. I had my own private space. I wasn't going to give up my freedom by sharing a room with someone I barely knew. When I told my mom I wasn't sharing my room, we had a huge fight. She threatened to kick me out if I didn't do what she asked. I was 14 at the time, but despite my age, I knew the law. I felt like I had to, since my mother was the type of person you couldn't truly trust. It's also just basic logic, and I knew she couldn't kick me out until I was an adult, or she'd face legal consequences. So I told her I knew she couldn't do it, and she was bluffing. She was frustrated, but she had to let me keep my room and decided to convert the basement into Jess's room. It wasn't a terrible place to be. It wasn't as nice as my room, but my mother worked hard to make it more appealing and livable. By the time she finished, it looked as good as any other room in the house. So I had no idea what the big deal was, but for some reason that's when Jess started disliking me. It could have had something to do with the fact that on the day she moved in, my mother gave them a house tour and made it clear to everyone that Jess had to live in the basement because I wasn't willing to share my room. I didn't understand why she'd make such an announcement, and I still can't think of a reason. Perhaps she intended to make me feel bad by saying it in front of Jess, but all it did was make me feel strange and uncomfortable. It made me feel embarrassed for Jess, but I didn't feel bad about standing my ground. Or perhaps she just loved drama and wanted Jess to know I'd refused to share, which would undoubtedly lead to problems between us. Jess didn't seem like the type of girl who would tolerate something like this. My mother was right. Jessica refused to let it go. After that day, she started treating me like an enemy. She'd still spend half the month at her mother's, but the days she lived with us were excruciatingly difficult for me. She was a menace, and she had a personal vendetta against me. She was often nasty to me and made horrible comments right to my face. To give you an example, she once told me my father probably left my mother because of me, then laughed like it was hilarious. She'd mock my appearance because I was a bit heavy at the time. She used to make fun of me at school for no apparent reason. Jess had a huge clique of mean girls at school, and she'd never miss a chance to bully me with her friends. Earlier, she and her friends would just ignore me, which I preferred. We were never friends, but that was far better than being her enemy. The saddest part was I had done nothing to her. She was simply offended that I didn't want to share my room. It was a ridiculous reason to hate me so much and try to ruin my life. My room was my safe space, and with a mother like mine, I don't think anyone can blame me for wanting my own space. Besides, if any of them had ever made an effort to get to know me, I might have shared my room with her, but she was a stranger to me, and I didn't feel comfortable giving up my independence for her. I never complained to my mother or Matt because they were aware of the situation, and it was pointless. They didn't care. I could be bullied my entire life, and they would still turn a blind eye since I wasn't important to them. So I had to put up with it and let her walk all over me. I'd fight back occasionally, but I quickly realized it only made the conflict worse. Our parents would step in, and I'd be grounded because they disliked me. She'd always cry a little too. Get out of trouble, but I couldn't cry on command like her, and I wasn't as manipulative. So I'd be the one punished for my poor behavior and told to start treating Jess like a sister. While she got away with it, and I faced the consequences. It was a miserable place to grow up, and I hated my existence. So when I was finally kicked out around my 18th birthday, I was relieved more than anything. I'd put up with my family's craziness for years, and it only got worse. Jess continued to be a nightmare, and our parents continued to back her without questioning her actions. In 4 years, she'd managed to turn our whole high school against me, and I had only a few friends who would even talk to me. Everyone else despised me because she did, and that was enough justification. It had taken a toll on my mental health, and I was struggling in all areas. I'd gained a lot of weight from binge eating, and it had severely changed my appearance for the worse. I was overweight, acne-prone, and had pretty awful hair. I was also trying to maintain my grades, so not only did I look terrible, but I also appeared dumb to everyone else. I had nothing going for me and was at an all-time low. Things at home were no better, as I still had to deal with Jess and my parents. My mother had grown increasingly irritable and would constantly compare me to Jess, despite the fact that Jess was the one who had made my life so much worse than it had been before. Things were bad before my mother married Matt, and they moved in, but not as horrible as they were now. Yes, it was terrible that my mother didn't care about me before, but after her marriage to Matt, I went from bad to worse. She went from not caring to intentionally making me feel horrible about myself, and it felt like I was living with mean girls at home. It was very clear to me that Jess was the daughter my mother had hoped for. Instead, life had dealt her the wrong hand, and she was stuck with me. I know they both wanted nothing more than for me to leave, and to be honest, I did too. My mother and Jess despised me, but Matt didn't care. I have no relatives to speak of other than my mother because my grandparents didn't communicate with us. I had never known my father, and I knew nothing about my other grandparents. I actually had nowhere to go, and I felt awkward approaching my friends for help. So I had to tough it out and stay with my mother to ensure I had a roof over my head and food to eat every day until I turned 18. But then, a few weeks before my birthday, an incident occurred, and I was expelled the same day. It was a weekend, yet I remember it like it was yesterday since it was one of the most terrible and stressful days of my life. We had both recently graduated, and Jess had started hanging out with a bigger group of people. She had a friend whose brother was in his senior year of college, and she was dating her brother. So she and her friend would hang out with his friends, who were all older than us. I understood exactly what they were up to, but I didn't think it was worth bringing it up with my parents, because with my luck it would only backfire. So I never told anyone that she'd started drinking. And while I couldn't prove it, I knew she was smoking pot and whatnot. I was never interested in any of it because, first and foremost, I never had friends who were cool enough to have access to alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs. Second, I was already struggling with my weight in academics. I didn't need to add alcohol or drugs to the mix. I already had plenty on my plate. But that day, I believe I left my room unlocked before going for a shower. The next thing I knew, I heard banging on the bathroom door, and my mother was yelling at me, insisting I come out right away. I had to rush and get dressed so I could see what she was talking about. When I got out of the shower, my mother, Matt, and Jess were waiting in my room, all with serious expressions. My mother pulled out a bunch of empty beer bottles from under my bed. And even more incriminating, there was a giant plastic baggie containing, I'm not sure how many grams of weed. My parents were unaware that it didn't belong to me or Jess. I believe she had planted it in my room when I wasn't there and then informed my mother. They started freaking out and yelling at me about what a terrible person I was. She didn't just yell at me about the alcohol and drugs. She also started complaining about how I was a complete disgrace to them. She protested that I ate all the food. She called me a waste. She was convinced I would never do anything worthwhile and would just keep living with them and spending their money. I tried to explain multiple times that none of it belonged to me and that I had no idea how it ended up in my room, but she didn't believe me. She lost it when I suggested that Jess might have planted it in my room to get me in trouble. She started yelling at me about how I was always jealous of her and that I would never be as good as her at anything, which was why I was trying to shift the blame. I was crying uncontrollably by that point, but she didn't seem to care and continued to rant at me. After a while, she stopped shouting and told me I needed to leave. I had no idea what she was talking about, so I asked her where I was going. She told me she didn't care where I went. She just wanted me out of the house because she was tired of dealing with me. When I refused to go, she threatened to call the cops on me. She added that because I was almost 18, they would take the drug allegations very seriously. She informed me she didn't want an addict living with her and consuming all of her money and resources. I had to watch out for myself now since she was tired of pretending to be a happy family with someone who deserved nothing. I was pleading with her not to force me out because while I wanted to leave, I knew I had nowhere to go and didn't have enough money on my own. But my mother didn't care. She told me that if I didn't leave that day, she would call the police and report me herself. I was surprised that she could be so cruel, and even more so that neither Matt nor Jess complained about it. They were literally going about their day as if nothing was happening. After a lot of crying and begging, I finally started packing my belongings. I would gladly choose to live on the streets over being arrested for drug possession. I finished packing by the evening, and as I left the house, no one said goodbye, and I never looked back. I went to the park and sat on a bench for a few hours, but it got pretty cold, so I decided to go over to a friend's apartment and spend the night, hoping they'd let me. I went to my best friend Amy's house and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She already knew how my parents were, so I didn't need to explain much. When I told her what had happened that day, she was horrified. She said her parents could help me if I let them. I'd always urged her not to tell anyone about how my parents treated me, including her parents, because I wasn't sure if anyone would believe me. I guess I felt awkward revealing these sensitive details about my life to others. But that day, she convinced me to tell her parents, who were as appalled as Amy was. They called my mother and tried to speak with her, but it didn't help, and she was quite unpleasant to them. So they realized talking to her wouldn't make things any better. Then they did something for which I am grateful beyond words. They promised me I could stay with them for as long as I needed and that they would help me. They were wealthy, so money wasn't an issue, and Amy adored me, so she was willing to share a room with me. I spent the following few years living with them and attending community college, which was the only place I could get accepted due to my poor grades. I started working and saving money to buy my own place, but Amy's parents made sure I never felt pressured to leave their home and made me as comfortable as they could. Then, roughly 3 years ago, I finally saved enough money to move out. I was proud of myself, and I was also grateful to Amy and her parents. I honestly couldn't have done it without them. Even on the day I moved out, they were the ones who helped me settle into my new home and told me I was welcome to return whenever I wanted to visit or even live with them. That was the turning point in my life. By then, I'd lost a lot of weight, and my health had improved significantly. I felt and looked better. I was also making enough money to support myself and had put in enough effort to improve myself, so I decided to start dating as well because I wanted to marry someday and needed to start searching. I met a couple of guys before Jeff, but it usually fizzled out before it could get serious. After meeting Jeff, I fully understood why, because Jeff and I were meant to be together, whereas the other guys I met before him were only there to have fun. When we first started dating, I had no idea he was wealthy and the heir to his father's company. I just liked him because he was funny and cute, and he seemed to like me too. After a few months of dating, he told me about his family, and I learned they owned a restaurant chain, which he would inherit in a few years after his father retired. Many people might think that learning how wealthy he was changed things for me, but I simply regarded him as the same person I had known before. That information made no difference to me. I still loved him as much as I did. We moved in together after about a year of dating, and he had introduced me to his family a few months earlier. Everyone in his family liked me, and we got along great. Everything was absolutely perfect. So when he recently asked if I wanted to marry him, I knew the answer right away. We've been engaged for 2 months now, and things are going great. But then, about 2 weeks ago, I got an email from Jess. We haven't spoken in almost 8 years, and I haven't heard from my family since I was kicked out. I had no idea why she would contact me now, especially to make amends. I believe enough time has passed, and neither of us cares enough to try to mend the problem anymore. So when I received that email and understood she was reaching out to apologize for all that had happened in the past and admit that she had been a complete nightmare, I was perplexed. She admitted to planting stuff in my room to get me tossed out since she disliked me for no reason. I had no understanding why she was revealing all of that so many years later, and I sensed something was wrong with the situation. The timing was further suspicious because I had recently gotten engaged, and I knew she must have known about it. I had mentioned it on social media, and we attended the same high school, so someone must have told her about it. Everything felt odd, so I started to investigate. As a result, I discovered that the man Jess was married to also owned the company that supplied plastic containers and other items for takeaway orders to Jeff's restaurants. It was easy for me. All I had to do was create a phony profile and stalk her. From there, I went to her husband's profile, where he disclosed everything about his work in his bio, so it was a simple process. I already knew a lot about Jeff's business because we had planned to run it together after his father retired, so I was already learning the ropes. When I realized this was the individual he was dealing with, I immediately alerted Jeff. Now, over the past few years, I've done my best not to think about my previous life since I just wanted to move on. So I didn't follow anyone from my family online, and I told my friends not to tell me anything about them. I had no idea Jess was already married and had been for a few years, but when I discovered that her husband was actually interacting with US, Jeff and I decided to cancel our arrangement. It was already costing us a lot of money, and I don't think I'd ever do business with that woman again. Jeff also informed me that the quality of the things delivered by her husband had reduced significantly since the beginning. They were considering dropping him as a supplier anyhow and were in talks with another guy who offered lower prices and better products. So last week, a few days after I received Jess's email, Jeff decided to meet with her husband and cancel their contract. But for some reason, Jess believes I did this on purpose to get her back, and she has been accusing me of it in her emails and social media posts. We haven't spoken in about a decade, But she still believes I am carrying a grudge against her, which I may be. But that is not the true reason her husband lost our contract. She posted a few days ago that many of her clients had already dropped them, and this was the final straw. But she maintains that I did it out of spite and that this was really unprofessional of us. She tagged our Facebook page in her post, and things have gotten pretty ugly. I feel awful for her because, according to her message, she and her husband have been losing business left and right. Okay, I'll admit that some of this was personal, but much of it was business as well. I doubt Jeff and his father would have dropped her husband as a supplier based only on my word. Nevertheless, I feel awful for her. I'm not sure if I should have made my fiancé quit working with my estranged stepsister's husband. Update 1. Okay, so Jeff has spoken with his father's lawyers and he believes we did the correct thing. So we're going after them legally and asking that they remove that message. We are also filing defamation charges against them because the guy charged us a bomb and delivered things that fell short of our expectations. If we could obtain a better offer somewhere else, we'd obviously go there. It's just a coincidence that Jess is married to the guy who runs that firm. Instead of improving their company's operations, she chose to trash us on social media. It's stupid that I allowed myself to feel horrible for her after everything she'd put me through. But you guys truly opened my eyes, so I appreciate that. Many of you have been quite supportive, which I appreciate. Thank you so much for your comments. Update 2. So Jeff and his father filed a slander claim against Jess and her husband a few days ago. We'll meet with a court-appointed mediator in a week. Maybe, but in the meantime, my mother has taken it upon herself to protect her poor little stepdaughter yet again. It is so silly. I feel like I am back in high school, but happily I'm not back in high school, so I can simply disregard what they say. Unlike then, I don't need to be in my mother's good graces to get a roof over my head. So she may cry all she wants about it, but nothing will change. She has been trying to contact me for the past few days, ever since Jess was served, but I have simply blocked her and gone on with my life. I don't need that type of negativity around me. I am engaged. I'm going to marry the guy of my dreams. And I don't need her or her insane stepdaughter back in my life. Update 3. Hey, so let me quickly fill you in. First, we won the defamation lawsuit. It wasn't even that difficult because my father-in-law's lawyers are absolute sharks, and they crushed her and her husband. So maybe they'll focus more on their business now and meet their clients' expectations. They had to pay for what they sawed, and we were able to strike an agreement. So that's over, and we can finally devote all of our attention to preparing our wedding. It's quite thrilling, and I can't wait to get married to Jeff. As previously stated, he is my soulmate, and I have waited a long time to find someone like him. Now that I have him, I will never let him go. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.